Today was Wednesday, November 19th, and the chill in Manhattan felt sharper than usual, cutting through the crowd outside the federal courthouse like a knife. But nothing outside could compare to the storm waiting inside courtroom 14B. For Sean Diddy Combs, this day was not just another hearing. It was the day his life would be judged in a way he had never imagined. The day one small mistake could consume everything he had built, everything he had fought for. 11 days ago, in the dimly lit corridors of Federal Correctional Institution Fort Dix, a guard paused near Diddy's bunk. What seemed like an ordinary compliance check turned into a moment that would ripple across the nation. A towel, tucked under the bed, gave off a sweet, fermented odor. Inside, wrapped in socks, was a plastic bottle, half filled with a bubbling amber liquid, a homemade alcohol mix, Fanta, sugar, fruit, and yeast, silently fermenting in the dark. Inmates knew it as a secret escape, a small rebellion against the rigid prison system. But to the federal authorities, it was a breach that could not be ignored. As the bottle was documented and photographed, whispers spread. Diddy did not argue, did not shout, did not plead. He simply stared at the floor, shoulders slumping as if he already understood the weight of what was coming. By the next morning, the news had leaked. Social media erupted. Diddy caught with alcohol in federal prison. Fans were stunned, critics furious, anchors debating on live television. Judge Aaron Subramanian, the same man who had sentenced Diddy to 4 years and 2 months just 6 weeks prior, now had the case in his hands again. The journey from Fort Dix to Manhattan was unusually silent. Diddy, wrists and ankles chained, sat in the transport van like a man walking toward the edge of a precipice he knew he could not step back from. Each clink of metal echoed in the confined space, a haunting rhythm of inevitability. Outside, life continued as normal. The city unaware, indifferent. Inside, every second stretched, heavy and suffocating. By the time the van reached the courthouse, media vans choked both sides of the street. Reporters jostled, cameras flashing so aggressively even the marshals flinched. "Emergency hearing sentence increase expected," shouted one live stream commentator. But inside the courtroom, the storm was already forming. Judge Subramanian reviewed the file again. Photos of the alcohol, officer statements, behavioral logs, prison warnings. To him, this was no longer a simple disciplinary matter. It was a pattern, a trajectory, a statement of defiance that could not go unanswered. When Diddy entered, escorted by marshals, the energy shifted instantly. The defense attorney, Mark Agnafilo, took a deep breath. Knowing the courtroom was no longer just a procedural stage, it was a theater of judgment, where every glance, every pause, every document could tilt the balance. The prosecutor, calm and measured, placed a thin folder on the evidence table. A single sound, a subtle echo, and every eye turned toward it. Inside were photographs from November 7th. The bottle under socks, half filled, cap swollen from fermentation. Officer logs detailing the discovery, handwritten notes of smell, concealment, and procedural action. Inmate statements describing Diddy taking small sips in the night, admitting to using it to cope with anxiety. The room shifted with every word, the weight of documentation pressing down like a hammer. Diddy's hands clenched, fingers turning pale, jaw tight, as if the air itself had thickened around him. Agnafilo rose, stepping forward not with papers, but with a story the prosecution couldn't show, a story of the human cost. He spoke of sleepless nights, panic attacks, anxiety, and isolation. He described how Diddy, once a global icon, was reduced to a man grappling with fear, frustration, and loss of identity. The alcohol, he argued, was not rebellion, but desperation, a misguided attempt to survive in a system built to break even the strongest of minds. For a moment, the courtroom wavered between empathy and judgment. Reporters shifted, the prosecutor's stance tightened, and the judge listened, silent but sharp, absorbing the testimony like a measured weight. Agnafilo's voice cracked slightly as he finished. He's guilty of being human. He's guilty of breaking under pressure. But if breaking under pressure is a crime worthy of double life, then none of us could survive those walls. Diddy lifted his eyes, glossy, desperate, and for the first time felt someone fighting for him, not just defending him, but trying to preserve what little remained of his identity inside the cold walls of Fort Dix. The judge tapped the file, eyes unreadable, the room hanging in suspended anticipation. Outside, cameras flashed. Inside, the air was electric with dread. Everyone sensed the same chilling truth. The verdict was not just approaching, it was about to strike. The courtroom remained still as Judge Subramanian's gaze lingered on Diddy. Nothing in the world outside mattered anymore, just the man in chains, the pile of files, and the weight of every choice that had led to this moment. The prosecutor rose again, this time without papers, without photos. In his hand, a sealed digital tablet rested, a subtle yet powerful reminder that technology could capture what the human eye might miss. He placed it carefully on the evidence table. Click. A surveillance video played, grainy, black and white, captured from a hallway camera inside Fort Dix, 2 days before November 7th. Diddy walked down the hall, head bowed, shoulders heavy. Another inmate approached, whispered something, and handed him a small wrapped object. Quick, nearly imperceptible but undeniable. No audio, just movement. Yet the tension in that short exchange reverberated like a gunshot. Reporters gasped. The defense stiffened. Even the judge, for the first time, leaned forward. It wasn't the alcohol itself. It wasn't the smell or the concealment. It was the pattern, the subtle signals of restlessness, of vulnerability, of a man willing to skirt the rules in a system that demanded absolute obedience. Mark Agnafilo rose immediately, his voice slicing through the courtroom, steady but edged with urgency. Your Honor, this video does not prove misconduct. It shows nothing illegal. It is ambiguous at best. His eyes never left the judge's, pleading for reason, for comprehension. But the prosecutor countered, voice low, deliberate, cutting through the tension. It shows mindset. Every word landed like a weighty hammer. The judge didn't flinch, didn't interrupt. He allowed the clip to play again and again, each replay tightening the invisible cord around Diddy's defense. The courtroom had become a pendulum, swinging between accusation and plea, judgment and mercy. Diddy's hands, pale and trembling, gripped the edge of the defense table. Every inch of the room seemed to close in on him, every breath feeling like inhaling cement. Finally, the judge spoke, voice calm but piercing. Mr. Combs, I gave you a structured sentence on October 3rd. I gave you a chance to stabilize, to reflect, to adapt to the restrictions of this system. Instead, within weeks, you've engaged in behavior that threatens not only your safety, but the order of this institution. Diddy's chest heaved, a sharp, ragged inhale, the kind that comes when you realize the tide has turned and there is no turning back. Agnafilo moved closer, placing a hand gently on Diddy's back, a fleeting human connection amidst the cold calculus of law. But even that small comfort was fleeting. The judge's voice sliced through the air again, this time with deliberate precision. This is not a single mistake. This is a trajectory. Every choice, every concealment, every act of defiance builds toward a pattern of instability that cannot be ignored. The prosecutor stepped forward, now narrating the meticulous documentation of Diddy's behavior. Officer logs chronicling sleepless nights, missed counts, refusals to follow directives, mental health evaluations detailing panic episodes, emotional volatility, escalating restlessness. Each note, each observation, a nail in the coffin of the court's trust. Agnafilo's defense strategy strained under the sheer weight of systemic evidence. He spoke urgently, painting the human cost, emphasizing Diddy's disorientation, his isolation, the collapse of identity, but even the most compelling story of despair struggled to compete with the relentless tide of data, reports, and footage. Then came the critical moment, the emotional pivot. Agnafilo looked directly at the judge, voice softer, almost a whisper. Your Honor, this is not defiance. This is a man breaking under conditions that no person should endure alone. He is not malicious. He is terrified. He is human. Punishing him further for this collapse will destroy not just his freedom, but his very hope. The courtroom held its collective breath. Cameras zoomed. Reporters leaned in. The judge listened, silent but attentive, processing every word, every gesture, every nuance. Diddy, for the first time, lifted his eyes, glossy, vulnerable, a man stripped bare before the world. He was not the celebrity. He was not the icon. He was simply a man, trembling under the weight of consequences he had never imagined. Judge Subramanian's fingers drummed lightly against the bench, a measured rhythm that echoed like a heartbeat. He opened a new folder, filled with internal memos, officer notes, and behavioral analyses, never before disclosed publicly. The weight of these records pressed down, forming a narrative that left no room for error, no room for doubt. Diddy's heart pounded in time with the ticking of invisible clocks. The prosecutor, voice steady, turned the focus to the broader implications. Your Honor, this is not about one bottle. It is about order. It is about precedent. It is about a system designed to maintain safety and discipline. Any leniency here undermines every effort to preserve that order. Each word reverberated, a reminder that in federal prison, personal struggle is weighed against institutional necessity, and mercy is never guaranteed. And as the evidence, the testimony, and the human story intertwined, the courtroom felt suspended in a moment between revelation and doom. Diddy's fate was no longer a question of intent or circumstance. It had become a measure of trust, stability, and whether a man who once commanded stages could survive the unrelenting machinery of the federal system. The room was heavy with anticipation. Every eye tracked Diddy as he sat slumped, hands clasped, knuckles white, fingers trembling. The weight of the last testimony had not lifted. It had only deepened. Judge Subramanian's gaze cut through the courtroom like a blade, measured, unrelenting. Not a flicker of emotion betrayed what he was about to deliver. And yet, the tension in the air made it almost unbearable. The prosecutor moved with precision, presenting a new piece of evidence, a handwritten note discovered during a recent cell inspection. The paper was creased, folded repeatedly, words scrawled in an almost frantic hand. Agnafilo's eyes widened as he read aloud. "It's just a drink. I can handle it. No one will know." The words seemed innocuous at first glance, but the implication was devastating. It wasn't merely possession, it was deliberate concealment, premeditated defiance, an act that transcended panic. Diddy's head dropped lower, shoulders curling inward. The sound of the judge's gavel tapping once, faint but resonant, punctuated the moment like a distant heartbeat echoing through stone walls. Reporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The narrative was evolving rapidly. The man who had once dominated stages, boardrooms, and headlines was now reduced to a figure of vulnerability, exposed, stripped of artifice. Agnafilo rose again, his suit crisp, his posture resolute despite the encroaching despair. "Your Honor," he began, voice steady, "we are looking at a human being, not a statistic. Mr. Combs has struggled with sleep deprivation, severe anxiety, and psychological disorientation since his arrival. The evidence of emotional collapse cannot be ignored. Yes, the note suggests concealment, but it also reveals desperation, fear. A man trying to survive in an environment designed to strip him of all control." The judge's eyes never wavered. "Mr. Agnafilo," he said, calm but forceful, "survival does not justify endangering the order of a federal institution. The law requires compliance, not negotiation. Your client has demonstrated repeatedly that he cannot adhere to the standards required." A hush fell over the room. Even Agnafilo paused, recognizing the edge in the judge's words. It was the quiet before a storm, the moment where hope and reality collided. Diddy's body trembled, not with anger, but with raw, visceral fear. His lips quivered, trying to form words, but none came. He was a man on the edge, suspended between chaos and control, with the eyes of the law boring into him. Then came the critical testimony that would tilt the balance irreversibly. A senior corrections officer, uniform pristine, voice steady and unflinching, recounted the events of November 7th in meticulous detail. The officer described discovering the concealed alcohol, the attempts at concealment, the potential consequences if the contraband had reached other inmates. Each sentence was measured, surgical, leaving no ambiguity. The officer's final statement lingered. This was not a mistake. It was a choice. The courtroom exhaled collectively, though none admitted it aloud. Diddy's knees shook. Agnafilo's jaw tightened. The balance of human empathy versus institutional order was tilting sharply. The evidence was cold, irrefutable, and inexorable. It was not merely a violation, it was a symbol of a man unable to reconcile his internal chaos with external rules. Agnafilo attempted one final emotional appeal, stepping close to the defense table. "Your Honor," he implored, voice softening. "Mr. Combs is not a criminal mastermind. He is a man who has fallen apart under pressure. He has shown remorse, he has cooperated, and he has struggled. Punishing him further will not serve justice, it will annihilate the remnants of his humanity." But the judge's response was precise, measured, unwavering. Combs's remorse does not erase the actions taken. It does not repair the trust that has been broken. It does not neutralize the risk posed by repeated violations. Federal law exists not only to punish, but to maintain safety, order, and consistency. In failing to adhere to these standards, Mr. Combs has demonstrated that leniency is no longer appropriate. Diddy's chest heaved, sweat beaded along his hairline. Every muscle in his body was taut, each heartbeat a reminder of impending judgment. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras zoomed, and the room seemed to shrink around him. There was no escape, no refuge, only the relentless weight of reality pressing down. Agnafilo, sensing the inevitability, leaned in, whispering, "Focus, breathe. We're still fighting. Stay present." But the words were barely audible over the storm of judgment building around them. Diddy's eyes, red-rimmed and glossy, reflected a lifetime collapsing into moments, decisions made and unmade, past and present colliding in an unstoppable torrent. Judge Subramanian paused, exhaled slowly, and finally opened a new folder. The courtroom held its collective breath. Inside were the culmination of all violations, all patterns, all warnings, a dossier heavy with history, cold with evidence, and unyielding in its conclusions. The judge's hand hovered above the papers, each second stretched into eternity. Then, with deliberate calm, he began speaking, each word precise, each syllable sharpened. "Mr. Combs, this court has reviewed every aspect of your conduct. We have considered the circumstances, your state of mind, and the human cost. Yet the evidence is unequivocal. You have chosen a path that endangers yourself, others, and the institution. You have failed to comply, failed to heed warnings, failed to stabilize. The consequences of your actions are therefore severe." Diddy's breath caught in his throat. The room felt suspended on the edge of a knife. The finality of each word pressed down with crushing inevitability. The courtroom was a pressure cooker, the air thick enough to choke on. Every eye remained fixed on Diddy, who sat frozen, knuckles clenched, the hollow rhythm of his breathing, the only motion betraying the storm within. Cameras pivoted, reporters scribbled, but no one dared speak. Even the clock seemed to slow, marking time in agonizing increments. Judge Subramanian's gaze remained unbroken, locked on Diddy as if piercing through the very layers of his soul. "Mr. Combs," he began, voice low but precise, "the offenses before this court are not isolated incidents. They are a pattern, a trajectory that reflects a repeated inability to adhere to standards that are fundamental to the safety and order of this institution." Diddy's head dropped lower, his jaw quivered, sweat streaked his temple. Agnafilo shifted uneasily, sensing the finality pressing into every corner of the room. This was no longer about argument, evidence, or empathy. It was about consequence, in its rawest, most unflinching form. The judge continued, his words deliberate, each one a calculated blow. "You were warned. You were given instruction. You were offered a structure designed to help you adapt and survive. And yet, within weeks, you violated that structure. You concealed alcohol. You defied policy. You jeopardized the safety of staff and fellow inmates." A collective murmur rippled through the gallery, quickly stifled by the marshal's commanding glance. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised, sensing that the apex of this trial was imminent. Diddy's chest heaved, each inhale sharp, each exhale trembling with disbelief. He was staring into the abyss, the magnitude of its darkness mirrored in his wide, terrified eyes. Agnafilo rose once more, his voice tight but steady. "Your Honor, please consider the human cost here. This is not a man who walked into these circumstances with the intent to cause harm. He walked in disoriented, humiliated, mentally unprepared for the reality of confinement. This violation, while serious, is symptomatic of a man who is struggling, who is unraveling, who is trying to survive under impossible conditions. The judge's eyes flicked toward the defense, then back to Diddy. His tone did not waver, though his words carried weight that seemed to bend the air itself. "Mr. Combs," he said, "consideration of personal struggle does not absolve one from responsibility. Federal law is clear. Possession of contraband, concealment, and willful defiance are punishable offenses. They threaten the structure designed to protect every person within these walls. Your personal struggles, while noted, do not negate the risk your actions create." Diddy's hands shook violently now, fingers clawing at the table. He tried to form words but found none. His voice, if it emerged, would have been a fragile thing, incapable of reaching the ears of judgment already set in stone. Agnafilo, sensing the desperation, leaned closer, whispering, "Focus on me, Sean. Don't let it swallow you." But Diddy was already adrift, the finality of the moment crashing over him like tidal waves. He had been through courts, hearings, and public scrutiny, but nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing could have. The man who had once ruled stages and boardrooms now seemed smaller than the chair he sat in, diminished by consequence, stripped bare of every pretense. The prosecutor stood, voice crisp, calculated, and unyielding. "Your Honor, the defense appeals to human frailty. We appeal to empathy. But the facts remain. This is not a lapse of judgment. It is a repeated pattern of behavior, defiance, and concealment. The risk posed to staff and inmates is tangible and immediate." Diddy's breath hitched. He clenched his jaw, fighting a sob that would not be contained. His mind raced flashes of freedom, family, the life outside these walls, each memory now painfully distant, impossibly unreachable. Agnafilo fought to interject, to anchor him, to prevent the complete collapse of spirit, but the courtroom had shifted. The momentum was irreversible. Judge Subramanian leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping even lower, heavier with inevitability. "This court has weighed every argument, every plea, every consideration of circumstance. Yet the conclusion is inescapable. Your conduct demonstrates an ongoing inability to comply with federal standards, an unpredictability that cannot be overlooked, and a risk that cannot be tolerated." The words landed like anvils. Diddy's hands gripped the table until his knuckles whitened, sweat pouring down his face, his chest heaving violently. The weight of a life, once defined by control and command, now reduced to trembling, hollow uncertainty. Reporters' cameras zoomed, capturing every second of the unraveling, every drop of despair etched across his features. Agnafilo, now straining against the inevitable, took a deep breath and spoke with measured intensity. "Your Honor, please consider mitigation, the context of collapse, the human reality of these violations. He is not defiant, he is broken, and punishment beyond measure will destroy what little stability remains." The judge paused, fingers steepled, eyes unblinking. The courtroom hung in suspended breath, a collective awareness that a historic moment was unfolding. Then, with measured precision, he spoke, his voice cutting through every thought, every emotion, every hope. "Mr. Combs, the court finds that the severity, premeditation, and repeated nature of your violations leave no alternative. Your previous sentence is hereby vacated. In its place, the court imposes the following: double life imprisonment. You are remanded into federal custody immediately." The words detonated through the courtroom. Diddy's body slumped forward. Agnafilo's hands shot out, attempting to steady him, to anchor him against the tidal wave of despair. Tears streamed unchecked down Diddy's face as the realization crystallized the life he had known, the freedoms he had taken for granted, were gone forever. Reporters whispered, cameras flashed, but the world outside was irrelevant. Inside, Diddy's universe had contracted to a singular, crushing truth: double life. The gavel's echo lingered like a death knell. Diddy sat slumped, the weight of double life imprisonment pressing down on him like a physical force, every heartbeat a hammer against his chest. His mind raced through fragments of memory concert stages, red carpets, record deals, luxury cars, flashing lights, all gone, erased in a single, irrevocable sentence. A marshal approached cautiously, placing a firm hand on Diddy's shoulder. "Sir, you need to stand," he said, but Diddy's body refused to obey. His legs felt like lead, his spine a hollow column. Agnafilo crouched beside him, whispering, "Breathe, just breathe, 1 second at a time." The courtroom had fallen into a suspended silence. Reporters, witnesses, staff, all frozen in the gravity of what had just occurred. A few tried to take notes, but their pens shook, their cameras trembled. The magnitude of the sentence, a double life for a man, already a symbol of fame, power, and influence, was almost surreal. Judge Subramanian remained seated, a figure of unflinching authority, observing the aftermath of his ruling. His eyes, cold and measured, scanned Diddy, noting every shudder, every tear, every fragment of the man who had once commanded stages worldwide. The sentence was not personal. It was law. It was consequence. It was inevitability. Agnafilo finally helped Diddy to his feet. Each movement was deliberate, like lifting a body weighed with invisible chains. Diddy's legs wobbled. He gripped the marshal's arm for balance. Cameras captured the moment a fallen icon, dragged from the courtroom, not by force, but by the crushing reality of his own existence. As they moved toward the holding area, Diddy's mind spiraled. He thought of October 3rd, of the warnings, of the fleeting hope that he could adapt, comply, survive. Every memory now a dagger, every regret amplified by the enormity of the punishment. The world outside, the music, the business, the glamour, was a ghost. He had been erased from it entirely. In the holding cell, Diddy slumped onto the bench. The walls were sterile, gray, unyielding. The reality of double life imprisonment pressed in from every angle. He curled into himself, trembling, tears rolling unchecked. Agnafilo knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Sean, it's done. You have to survive this. You have to live through it," he whispered. Diddy looked up, hollow eyes meeting the gaze of the man who had fought for him in the courtroom. "Live?" he croaked. How do I live when everything I was, everything I had, is gone?" His voice broke, echoing against the cold walls. Agnafilo's reply was soft but firm. "One day at a time. 1 hour. One breath. That's all you can do now. You may not have your freedom, Sean, but you still have your mind, your thoughts, your will. Cling to that." Outside, the media frenzy erupted. Headlines flashed across screens worldwide. Diddy sentenced to double life shock in federal court. Icon falls. Combs's career and freedom destroyed. Historic ruling stuns. Fans and industry. Social media exploded with disbelief, outrage, sympathy, speculation. The world watched a titan crumble, consumed by consequences too immense to fathom. Inside, Diddy's universe had contracted to a single, unbroken thread of survival. The courtroom drama, the flashing lights, the global attention, all irrelevant to the daily reality he now faced. Each day would be a battle, each hour a test of endurance, each breath a reminder of the life he lost. He thought of those early nights in confinement, the insomnia, the panic attacks, the quiet sobs in the darkness. They would return, only amplified, now with no escape, no temporary relief, no end in sight. But somewhere deep, buried beneath the despair, a fragile ember remained, the will to endure, to exist, to somehow navigate a world constructed entirely of confinement and loss. Agnafilo rose, knowing there was nothing more he could do at this moment. "I'll be back, Sean. I promise. We'll face this, step by step." Diddy nodded weakly, eyes vacant but just perceptibly aware. He had no choice. Life, even doubled and doubled again, demanded continuation. Survival was now the only form of rebellion left to him. As the door clanged shut behind the marshal, Diddy sat alone, facing the sterile gray walls of his new reality. Time stretched ahead, unbroken, unyielding, merciless. He had lost everything external, but the internal battle, silent and relentless, had only begun. Every heartbeat, every thought, every flicker of memory became a lifeline, the thread on which his humanity would hang. Outside the courtroom, the world debated, sensationalized, and mourned. Inside, Diddy faced a private apocalypse, one that no headline, no flashbulb, no viral post could capture. The collapse of a public persona had been instantaneous. The struggle of the man behind it would stretch into eternity. And in that quiet, suffocating cell, the echo of a single truth reverberated endlessly. Power, fame, fortune, none of it mattered now. What mattered was survival. And survival, in the shadow of double life, was a battle unlike any Diddy had ever faced. The story, the saga, the man, everything had been rewritten in that courtroom, under the steady hand and cold eyes of Judge Subramanian. And now, the real story began. Not of a celebrity, not of a music mogul, not of a public figure, but of a man, stripped bare, confronting the unimaginable, forced to endure the relentless weight of double life imprisonment.